There's only 6 months left until we hit the FSA deadline for all CBD products to have a validated novel foods application. In this video, you'll learn everything you need to know as a CBD company to keep your products in the UK market after this deadline. As you're most likely aware, the FSA has given a deadline of the 31st of March 2021 for CBD companies to have a validated novel foods application for each of their products. Up till now, there's uncertainty in the market as to what data was required to gain a successful novel foods validated dossier. The FSA has confirmed to the ACI that toxicology safety data is a prerequisite for having a successful application validated. That's pretty major news. I'm Bill Griffin. I'm media lead for the Association for the Cannabinoid Industry. And I'm joined today by a panel of esteemed experts who will discuss exactly what the FSA's confirmation means to CBD companies who are selling products in the UK. I have to stress, this is essential viewing for any CBD company that wants to continue selling their products legally in the UK after the 31st of March 2021. We have Dr. Parveen Batara. Parveen is the head of the ACI Regulatory and Compliance Unit. And Parveen has 20 years experience within the international pharmaceutical regulatory environment. And she has 12 years experience in the medicinal cannabis industry and covering everything from cultivation right through to FDA approval for finished medicinal products. Parveen is joined by Dr. Paul Duffy. Paul is a European registered toxicologist with over 30 years toxicology safety evaluation experience in the pharmaceutical industry. And Paul has served on the committees of the US Society of Toxicology, the British Toxicology Society, and he's a fellow of the BTS and a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology. Rounding up today's panel, we have Mark Bowes-Kavanagh. Mark is Managing Director of Advanced Development and Safety Laboratories Limited, ADSL. Mark's a Chartered Fellow for the Royal Society of Chemistry, a member of the British Toxicology Society, a member of the Society of Cosmetic Scientists, and is a Chartered Chemist and Scientist. And joining this panel, we have two people representing the view from the industry. And this is Mark Burbridge, who's sitting with Parveen. Mark is Development and Quality Lead for the ACI. And we have Shomi Malik, who is the Development Director for the ACI. So these two are in daily conversations with representatives of companies within the CBD industry in the UK. And they will be able to voice some of the questions that they're repeatedly getting. Now, how I'm going to structure today's video, basically I'm going to present three different scenarios of three different companies at different levels of the supply chain in the UK. They will each be asking a question which we will put to one of the experts on the panel. So the first scenario, I'm a CBD brand. I'm selling in the UK's leading high street pharmacy chain. We've been told by our white label manufacturer that our CBD raw materials supplier is taking care of novel foods applications, and we don't need to do anything. What evidence must we see to ensure that we are able to stay on the market after the 31st of March deadline, 2021?
Thank you for the question. So the FSA are very specific that the data that is represented for their product that is on the market, the risk dossier, must contain the end use of the product. So in layman's terms, that is the finished product. So the way the consortium is put together, as has been described, is we've put it together in a way that we are undergoing a primary base risk dossier that will include the extended physical tox testing that will be spoken about later on in this presentation. We will then read across that data to the finished product, and we will make sure then the bioavailability, as we call it, or the ADME, is covered within that finished product. That is a requirement, and the high street stores to which this company is particularly talking about will require to see this information. So within the risk dossier, as we've spoken before, there's a number of regulatory and compliant issues. We've spoken about genotox. We've spoken before about ADME. We don't need to talk about too much techie detail. We've spoken about all the issues of the stability testing. We've spoken about all the issues in terms of regulatory compliance to make sure that product is safe on the market, and your high street store will expect you to not expose them and have that information to hand and show the end use of the product, as we call it, the bioavailability. So having your supplier supply you with the base CBD is not enough to cover you for that end product. You need to show the read across information, the extended physical toxicity test, and the other regulatory compliant information that we've already described in many presentations as part of that final risk dossier. One point that I would just quickly make is in that risk dossier that's at the end, there is the accommodation that you may be able to accommodate a number of different oils within that risk dossier, or a number of different types of chocolate, or a number of different types of tea. Very specific to that particular area, but we at ADSL are also looking at trying to help with costs by amalgamating maybe certain oils where we can do the theoretical tox data to go with this physical tox data that we've generated with these studies, and to make sure that the client is covered for all the ADME and bioavailability of the finished product, and the product is safe to go on the market, and it's also competitive in terms of cost because we covered all the areas of the finished product.
So I need to ensure that my supplier can provide all this information for me.
And of course, the supplier, from an IP point of view, may not know what products you're actually selling on the market. All they'll know is whether they're supplying you with the isolate or the broad spectrum or the full spectrum CBD. They don't know what products you have at the end of the market. You use companies like ADSL to regulate and to look at the theoretical toxicity calculations by product chemistry once you add that CBD to your finished product or your finished product base. So therefore, the manufacturing supplier can't possibly put through your information and cover the safety that's required for a novel food application, because they don't know what product you have got on the market. And you may well have IP in terms of formulation details and things like that, which of course your supplier will not know. So
I need to act. I can't just take it from my white label company that everything's going to be okay. I need to talk to the ACI, I need to talk to ADSL and ensure that everything's covered. Yeah, and the worrying aspect of that is more to do with the brand itself and the high street, their relationship, because the brand is exposing that high street store, and the brand is exposing itself on the basis that a supplier has turned around and said, I will put this registration through for you. Now that is quite a profound statement for a supplier to turn around to a brand and say, my answer to the brand or the client would be, challenge your supplier. Ask them what information they're doing, what conversations they've had with the FSA, what conversations they've had, with other clients, and ask them what information they can put together. And I think they'll find that there's only one technical solution that works with this, and that is an organisation that already has a membership, such as the ACI, and a company that can offer the physical testing to support their application with an extended 90-day oral toxicity test to make sure that we've covered the safety and the risk management of the CBD profiling.
I think Mark's explained that very clearly. For me, the bottom line is all brands need a novel food application dossier, but in many cases, a bulk of the information in that dossier can be covered by cross-reference to a supplier's novel food application. What is clear is everyone needs a novel food application with the right content.
I think well put, Paul and Mark. I think you covered absolutely everything, and that the summary is that novel food application from your supplier must link to the end user product. End user product is the finished product, which is your product with your IP. It is your duty to keep your product on the market, keep it safe. You need to ensure that the supplier's novel food application covers all the aspects of your product. And if it isn't, then you have a challenging road ahead.
I would, at this point, if brands are still asking that type of question about the end use of the product, I really would implore them to challenge their suppliers, because the timings are becoming restricted and we need to get it sorted out very, very quickly. So challenge a supplier, ask them what information they have, and we can support them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Mark. Some companies are still out there saying we're going it alone. And then when you challenge them, there's nothing to back that up. Now, as a brand, with the information we're giving you here today, and I hope it's as clear as possible, that if you don't see evidence that your supplier, your supply chain is having these conversations, come the 31st of March 2021, you're going to be left in quite a tight situation. So that word that Mark said, challenge your suppliers, see evidence, is my advice to brands here.
You mentioned a few times there in some of the questions of the ACI Safety Consortium. So maybe I could give the floor to Mark Burbridge to maybe sort of in a nutshell, what is the ACI Safety Consortium?
The ACI Safety Consortium is generating the necessary data that's required from a toxicological standpoint to alleviate the information that was shared by the COT report earlier in the year, which indicated that CBD has the potential to cause liver damage. That's the overall reasoning behind the toxicological data, and obviously with all the necessary support that we'll be giving around the data sets, the data collation and the read across data. I do have a question following on from the original questions and answers that we had before. So we're talking a lot about companies should be challenging their suppliers, they should be challenging their manufacturers, and this is exactly what we should be doing. The one thing that I want to ask is, for ACI consortium members, when the clients of manufacturers that are a part of the consortium are challenging these manufacturers, how does the ACI plan on giving their members the resources to present to the brands that they work with to show them the evidence that the ACI members will have all of the relevant information ready for the 31st of March?
That's a very interesting question, Mark. As a part of the ACI consortium, we are generating all the necessary information required to fill in the gaps highlighted by the court committee to ensure we have a scientific evidence-based data generated from this toxicological study, the OECD 408, which we are generating now and starting fairly soon. For the members of ACI, we can give them or share the letter of intent and any further details which are required by the brands or the white labelers or the consortium members if they need to satisfy their end users or the customers. So they can request any information what they want from us. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Parveen. And one last question, and we have touched upon it, but I just want to get a very clear answer. Companies providing finished products, do they need to be linked to the main novel food application from their raw material supplier? Because this is one of the areas there is a lot of confusion around in the industry. Some companies believe that, as we touched upon before, they only need to basically generate the necessary stability data, and providing they're using the raw material, they're fine. What is the view on this? What's the factual information?
I will give the floor to Mark and Paul in a minute. I think that's, again, a very important and pertinent question in this case, that every toxicological information which is being generated by the consortium member need to be read across into the finished product. Finished product need the necessary information because this is the finished product which end user is using for the consumer safety. It's very important that we generate the toxicological data and read across to ensure that all the bioavailability, the ADME study, the genotox is appropriate for that product, and necessary calculations are done to ensure the appropriate recommended dose for the finished product is right.
Mark, it's a good question in terms of, and I think part of your question was about proof that you're undergoing the process and your clients are aware of that. It's something that we've discussed, ADSL and ACI, in quite some detail. And what we're doing with many of the partners in this whole process is we're supplying a declaration letter and a letter of intent for those brands to be able to show their clients, to show that they're going through that process. And let's not forget, this whole FSA application through the novel food application is a portal system. We'll be updating all the membership, hopefully weekly, in terms of what is happening, what part of the process we're at. So we'll be keeping them abreast. let's remember, this isn't about the ACI and ADSL. This is about us all working together as a collaborative effect to get this through by the 31st of March 2021.
Yeah, and just to emphasise the linkage, any end product NFA, novel food application, will need to link to a supplier's novel food application, which in itself needs to be validated in order for the end product validation to be appropriate. So the linkage is got to be there, even if the actual data is not contained in an end user novel food application.
If I understand this correctly, the FSA are saying the toxicology data is necessary if I want to keep my products on the market next year. To get that toxicology data myself or as our company is going to be extremely expensive. So in order to keep these costs down, we would participate within the ACI Consortium, who are doing this work on behalf of the members, which would include my manufacturer and hopefully my raw material manufacturer as well.
That's correct.
Yeah, great stuff. So thank you everybody there. Let's move on to the second scenario. So the second scenario is again a CBD brand, but they're in a little bit of a different situation to the first brand. The first brand is having their products made by a white label manufacturer. The second one is a little bit different. So I'm a CBD brand and I'm growing my own hemp, which I then process to make my own CBD, which we include in our products, and we're selling throughout the UK. We were under the impression that having toxicology safety data was not necessary for our novel foods application. Now that we have this clarification, what do we need to do to stay on the market?
Again, a very, very important question. There are certain companies who have already submitted their novel food application just using the literature-based approach available on in the public domain. I must clarify the information in the public domain is from the Epidiolex. Epidiolex is a pharmaceutical product, medicinal product, and the interpretation and the data, first of all, the data and the IP is not fully available to the public domain. It's only very high level information is available, and that information is for the medicinal products. So that information is very useful for the background of your setting the scene for the toxicological requirement. But EFSA's guidelines has clearly indicated that information, and also the court committee's minutes have clearly indicated there are a lot of gaps in that information which need to be filled with the new toxicological data like the OECD 408 study, which ACI Consortium is now doing, has to be generated and have to be part of that. And if they have already submitted their application, they can still join the ACI Consortium and be part of that and have that information generated for the safety of not on their novel food application success, but also the consumer who are using their key CBD raw material and using into their various finished products. So they can still generate that data and join the ACI Consortium.
So in that hypothetical scenario, I've submitted my dossier and I've done most of the data generation, but I've not done tox. But my dossier is already submitted. What does that look like in terms of a clear timeline? Do I need to restart my dossier or can I add it in?
If they submitted their dossier, application is going to be a requirement is that need to be validated by 31st of March. So they have still time to discuss and collaborate with ACI and generate that data, and absolutely they can update their application, no problem. Yes, they have a time.
I think it's a very good question. And what's interesting is a number of companies have said that they have submitted their applications. We are not aware that any of those applications have been validated. And our information from FSA is tox is a requirement for any application to be validated. So just to add on what Parveen said is, if you've submitted an application, that will be under review. You may very well get a response that says there is information required for validation, and that information could very well be the toxicology. And as such, it's in members' interest to be able to subsequently respond back to the FSA with the appropriate information, which you can get from the consortium.
So for absolute clarity from me, I've submitted my application. I have no tox data. If I don't include tox data in this application, what will happen based on the communication that the ACI has had with the FSA on the 31st of March next year?
My interpretation, and again, we will have to wait and see what happens, but my interpretation is it will not be a validated application, and beyond the deadline, then it's not permissible for those products to be on the shelves.
One point that I would make, there's a lot of ambiguity around the word tox data. And I think this is part of the problem where there's been given advice from different associations about tox data. Any sector that you work in, food, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, you'll be required to do a risk dossier safety assessment. And in the public domain, we use supporting evidence from different types of journal to substantiate margins of safety of a product. This is theoretical data. That data is, as Parveen has suggested earlier, we'll be using to back up a lot of the work and reduce the amount of animal testing that is required in this project. However, it's very, very clear that there is an extended physical toxicity test that must be done for the risk dossier to be validated. That has come from a number of different angles, and Paul will explain about that a little bit later. But it's very, very clear. So on that basis, when people say they haven't got tox data, they may have some theoretical tox data, but I can assure you the data that's coming from CBD and from THC, for example, and inhalation is not practical for the novel foods application. So therefore, this extended 90-day oral toxicity test has to be done. There is no doubt about that. So when people say about tox data, I think they're getting a little bit of advice from people saying, yeah, look it up, you can get some theoretical data and that will substantiate your application. That will not substantiate your application. It is not specific to CBD. And of course, in novel food applications with other foods, that they've used theoretical data, and those novel food applications have been validated. But we're talking about CBD and cannabinoid chemistry, and that data is not in the public domain, and that is clear.
Yeah, and Mark, that's why we, as ACI consortium members, had a meeting with FSA on the 14th of September to clarify and demystify all those confusions, and had a discussion, and FSA have confirmed that no application will be validated without the appropriate toxicological data.
All right, that's very clear. Thank you. Show me, you got any questions or points around?
Yes, I've heard of a lot of instances where dossiers have been submitted, and I just want to reiterate that it is not too late to do something about this. So if you've already submitted your dossier and you've either taken advice or you've gone through some miscommunications from official channels, and this will be a recurring theme throughout all the questions, tox data is required, as just set out by Mark, Parveen and Paul, in any scenario. If you haven't invested in that, but you've already submitted your dossier, it is not too late to join us, to speak to us, to pick up the phone and see how we can help you on your dossier that's already been submitted. And I want to make that really, really clear. It is not too late if it's already been submitted.
So if we go back to this scenario, if I were to continue on my current trajectory, essentially I'm not going to get a validated novel food application come next March, and it's not going to be legal for me to sell my products anymore.
Absolutely not. And it's touching on Mark's point as well, that this data just doesn't exist. We have to generate it, right?
So again, it's similar to the first scenario. I've got two options. I generate this data myself, which is going to cost
millions,
right? Or I join a consortium.
Absolutely. The government, the FSA's advisory committee, the Committee on Toxicity, has explicitly said more data is needed.
So before we move on to the third scenario, I'll just see if Mark B has any other questions to add.
Yeah, so we're hearing an OECD 408. People listening, they won't know what an OECD 408 is. So they might be going away from this and thinking, oh, I just need to go away and do an OECD 408. Can you just explain, one, what it is, and two, what the costs would be if I were to do it independently? And finally, if I'm looking to do an OECD 408 right now, if I decide I'm going to go away and do this, what are the challenges that I may face in doing this if I choose not to be a part of the consortium?
The OECD 408 is an abbreviation. What that refers to is an OECD outlined study design, toxicology study design in rodents, in rats, that has to comply with certain parameters and requirements in order to be suitable for its purpose. So in the case of an OECD 408, that's a 90-day or a 3-month or toxicity study by the appropriate route, in this case oral, because we're talking about food products, and includes various parameters such as evaluation of plasma, evaluation of blood parameters, and histopathology, and plus other kind of parameters around the whole study. It's quite an extensive study, it's detailed, and the 408 refers to the European FSA published guidance on what should be in that study and what it should look like. So that's why everybody talks about 408. It refers to a regulatory authority defined study design and duration. So that's where the 408 comes from. Challenges to set one of these things up on a novel food or any kind of product, if you like, without the appropriate background information. You have to include citing work in order to be able to pick the appropriate doses to make sure that the study is valid and fit for purpose. So a study like this doesn't just take 3 months. First of all, it takes longer than that to do because of the requirement for histopathology evaluation, and it requires longer than that to do because it needs to be preceded by citing work in order to make the main study a valid study. So let's not mistake the fact that this is no small undertaking. It's a big, high-intensity study of long duration, and depending on where you go, but you could be looking at hundreds of thousands of pounds to complete such a program, and that's just the 408 study. Never mind the rest of the material and information you need around the dossier. Do you want to add to anything on that, Mark, Parveen?
No, I think you described it very well there, Paul. What I would say is it's not easy to book these studies either, given the fact that we've had a very difficult time with COVID. So a lot of medications at the moment are being tested as we speak. We've managed to secure space to start off the range finding study, which, as Paul described, is about the systemic toxicity, i.e. how much of this particular product are we going to test on the rodents and rats to make sure we have the safety for the product. And of course, ethically, you can't do any of these studies until you've created the parameters for the study. So as Paul again has indicated, that study, just because it says 90 days, is not 3 months. In fact, the whole process is 5 to 6 months. So, you know, it is a comprehensive study. It's a study that's approved by the FSA. It's a study that is well represented. And we've chosen a particular laboratory who has particular experience in these type of areas. It's very renowned, UK-based, GMP standard. So there's been a lot of background work on the protocol and other elements of this whole project. And as Paul says, this is just part of that process in generating that risk dossier.
What I will have to add over here is that, as Mark explained, that we have already agreed with the CRO, Covens, to do this study. We've done the protocol. It has taken us a long time to just agree to the protocols and making sure that we are meeting all the requirements. And we have shared those protocols with FSA as well.
So it sounds like there's something that has to be done. We have time constraints on it, and obviously a lot of cost involved. And the ACI has put a lot of the legwork in already, and the ADSL.
The more companies that join up, the lower the costs will be. But this isn't just a cost thing. This is ensuring that your compliance needs are met to the highest standard.
One thing I would like to add over here is that apart from that coming together, we under ACI have such an expert team coming from all the varied background and experience. So not only that we will do that study for you, we can have one-to-one discussions with you, which we already have been doing that, and manage your individual challenges and give the solution.
Okay, I think we discussed that one quite a lot. Let's move into the third scenario, which is a little bit different. So in the supply chain, this is really kind of focusing on the source, and probably the source of the bulk of the CBD products that are sold in the UK at the moment. So I'm the CEO of a multinational CBD raw material manufacturer. Our novel foods application is already being processed. At the time of submission, it was not clear whether the tox data was required or not, so we relied upon what was already existing in the public domain. I've got three questions. How will the FSA's recent confirmation impact our current application? What should we be communicating to our customers to help them ensure that they're keeping their products on the market next year? And finally, do I have to account for all of the different variations of finished products within my application? So a few of these points I'm feeling we have touched upon already, but maybe you could kind of encapsulate that for...
Yeah, you described that particular scenario as a new and different one, but many of the things we have discussed do apply. So it's worth just reiterating and emphasising a couple of points here. The FSA is not just a regulatory body. They have an ethical and moral duty to ensure consumer safety. So that is where they're coming from. They rely on a team of experts that's been alluded to before, the Committee on Toxicity, which is a team of internationally recognised experts for advice on consumer safety of food ingredients. In this case, we are talking about CBD. The COT position, after several review cycles, is that there are gaps in the toxicological information available for CBD, either from the published literature or from summary information on the pharmaceutical product Epidiolex, that are not, that information, that source does not meet their requirements to allow them a full evaluation of CBD safety. And as a consequence, those gaps need to be filled. The FSA position is we should follow European FSA guidance on what would be required to support, from a toxicology point of view, the novel food application. And that EFSA guidance alludes to the OECD 408 type of study as a minimum in order to plug those gaps. So from our perspective, the FSA have been quite clear, and that is without that information, you will not get a validated application, let alone an authorization to continue selling your products in the UK market. So for me, that's quite clear. And in order to do that, this OECD 408 type of study has to be completed. So we as a consortium are doing that, and that is what's required. So if you're a major supplier of a CBD product for your own products or other end users, the application that you have put in this scenario is, in our view, likely to be validated because it lacks the information that's been quite clearly stated by the FSA is required. And literature sources and summary information on Epidiolex is insufficient.
Right, so if I continue on this current trajectory, essentially, we're not going to get our novel foods application validated, which is going to have an effect downstream to all of my customers.
That would appear to be the case.
I would say as well, just coming back to the just the last aspects on the protocol, as part of the novel food application, they have spoken about reproduction issues and possible carcinogen issues. And as part of our study, we've included that as when we take samples to make sure we don't have to go any further animal testing studies subject to we getting a positive result from the OECD 408. So a lot of background work on that study to make sure we're ethically answering what is required in this market. So by coming along with the consortium, you get three major areas of success. The first thing is you have the regulatory framework to have your products on the market. We are following the FSA. We are following all the organisations that are governing this market to make sure your product is safe to go on the market. Two, you're paying a much more competitive price than what you would if you went alone, let alone if you could book it in and undergo this risk dossier yourselves. And one of the most important things, and it should really be highlighted, is the FSA are very clear on their tiered approach on how the dossier should be put together and ethically put together. And we've compiled all those thoughts together, what is required for the novel food application, from experts who've been dealing in the cannabinoid industry for years, from the COT committee to toxicologists, and the whole risk profile and dossier that we've got is a very efficient dossier, ethically correct and competitive. And I don't think me even standing outside of this, and perhaps people might think I have a bias being with ADSL, my point in this is trying to find a technical solution for the CBD regulation. And I hope that we can meet these brands and do other work with them in the future. The most important thing is getting past that deadline on March the 31st. And I think we've highlighted every single point that's there to make sure we will be successful.
Absolutely right, Mark. One thing I would like to add over here is that as a result of all that consortium work which we are putting in together, we are very nearly ready to submit a pre-tox report to FSA and a draft populated dossier to share with FSA prior to the actual submission. So we'll be having a continuous dialogue to ensure that all our data has been addressed by FSA and shared with FSA.
I think obviously the expertise that we have on here now and the members of the ACI team have proven the work that they've done over the last 6 to 12 months to show that this is the most robust proposition that's currently available for companies to be able to go through novel foods. And I ask people that make contact with us, ring the ACI, speak to Show Me, let us explain in more detail about what we're doing, because ultimately we're looking to create a clear, compliant pathway for companies to operate in the CBD space. We want the CBD space to grow and to really showcase the UK as a country that's embraced this as an opportunity and really lead the way going forward.
Thank you, everybody. I think we covered this scenario very well now. Maybe we could wrap this up as kind of taking all three scenarios together. We've got 6 months now until we have to have our novel food applications validated. Has somebody got any points to stress here on the timing of all of this?
We need to make sure that we are submitting it, getting it ready, compiling the dossier, because it's not just generating the data, compiling the dossier takes time as well. So you need to start. If you haven't started, please start now. No more time.
Yeah, and I would just add that we've described it in this presentation and this video a little bit. I would say to brands, as we said before, challenge your manufacturer, find out what information they're putting through to the risk dossier. And for brands, how much is it worth exposing yourself in the market without a correct dossier? So those two scenarios come to one conclusion, and that is have a discussion, join up with the consortium, and be safe in the knowledge that your product is going on the right path to be validated by March the 31st, 2021.
Let's not forget that we talked a lot about toxicology data today, but it's the whole content of the dossier, including the other requirements that need to be there. That within the consortium, Mark's team and Mark's laboratory are working very hard to generate that. Tox is key, let's not forget that, but it's the whole dossier, and that takes time, as Parveen has said, if you're going to get anywhere near that deadline of the 31st of March next year.
I could maybe just do a kind of a recap. The ACI have had confirmation from the FSA that toxicology data studies are necessary to get a novel food application validated by the 31st of March 2021. So that means, as a company in the business of selling CBD, you need to have this data. This data does not exist. This data needs to be gathered. A company could go off and do it themselves, and spend millions, hundreds of thousands. Or they could join the ACI Consortium that are already in talks with the FSA, have agreed kind of the pathway forward for this, can provide this data for the individual companies at a shared cost, and will deliver a very comprehensive package. And so for a CBD company in this space, who's kind of wanting the most cost efficient and probably comprehensive option out there, they should be getting in touch with the ACI if they have not already.
Very good summary.
All right, thanks everybody. That was really good. Thank you.